This is episode 624 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am very pleased to be joined for this week's episode by Carol Wight. She is executive director of the New Mexico Restaurant Association and a friend of the show. Welcome back to Tipping Point, New Mexico, Carol.
Thanks so much, Paul, for having me.
Yeah, well, lots going on these days, but first and foremost, we have a campaign for the presidency of the United States, and your industry indirectly is now engaged, I would say, in a potential policy discussion that we may have if Donald Trump were to re-enter the White House over tips and taxing of tips. So that's something that when people think of tipping, at least 10 years ago, that was pretty much exclusively maybe a restaurant thing, maybe holidays, the newspaper guy, or something else. But definitely when you think tipping, you think restaurants. Is this something that you think is a good idea? Are you involved in conversations or people higher up in Washington with the national group? Take us through this discussion on tipping.
Yeah, so I think the president did this for one thing to get votes, but the other thing is that he's in the industry, right? I mean, he has been in hotels and restaurants for many, many years.
Bellhops, of course.
So he gets it, and so we support it. There's actually a bill in Congress right now that's being floated that does this very thing, and we'll see where it goes. You know, we want to support our servers in the industry, and if this is a way we can do that, we certainly want to support them in this.
And I definitely want to talk to you about the labor force involved in restaurants in a little bit, but I have my own history of tipping. I did work in restaurants, but I spent a lot more time in golf and caddying, carrying the clubs around. Believe it or not, that industry, so to speak, I never thought about it being an industry, but caddies are exempt from tipping or from taxes on tipping. Somehow we got a special little exemption.
Interesting.
So it's one of the things that made me a free market capitalist growing up is because you go and you work, you show up, you get paid, and everything is done on a cash basis. At least it was in those dark ages of the 1990s. And it's something that I really appreciated. You have that cash sitting in your pocket. It's a different feel from getting paid a check every 2 weeks. And, in the immortal words of Jennifer Aniston and Friends, who is this FICA guy and why is he taking all my money?
Right.
Because when you do get a tip, and that's one of the things that I think is most important, is if you have to, and I know there's ways around it, and we can dive into that or not, but let's just say that I know that restaurant personnel have at least in many places, their ways of circumventing absolute maximum tipping, taxes on tipping. But you're not just paying tax on whatever your personal your income tax rate is. You also have to get into the FICA situation because none of that is taken out of tips. So if you're filing those tips, it turns into even at a very low income level, it feels like a very onerous tax.
Well, it does because your pay is lower, and then you're taking the taxes out of that lower pay. So sometimes you end up with no paycheck.
Right.
And that's where servers very often feel it. It's like, well, I didn't even get a paycheck. Well, that's not because your employer didn't want to pay you. It's because your employer had to take the taxes out. And with that smaller paycheck, the taxes took up the whole chunk. So you're right. And it is a very obvious thing for those folks. Whereas some of us who, we make a paycheck and you get used to the amount without the taxes included, right? So the tax is already taken out, you get that check, and after a while, your first paycheck, you really notice it.
Right.
Your 100th paycheck, it's a fact of life. And so it's interesting about the caddies. Now you were talking about in some ways servers can hide their tips and et cetera. Anymore, that's really difficult to do
Okay.
because of credit cards. Most people do not pay cash tips, and so the credit cards keep that. What do I want to say? Keep the servers honest, really.
Right. Well, I can tell you that when we do have cash, and I'm better about carrying cash than my wife, let's just say that when we do go out to a restaurant, a lot of times we will uh, pay credit card on the bill and then tip in cash. And I know that we'll just say that that opens up avenues that can be exploited. Not
That's
recommending that, but let's just say that I did. You worked in restaurants, right?
oh yeah.
Were you a server mostly,
No, no,
or
no. I owned restaurants.
did you ever do serving? Did you ever
I,
take
I
tips?
was a server a couple of times. I wasn't very good at it.
Okay. Well, I in my limited time when I did serve, it was kind of my rule of thumb personally that I was working for the tips, and then because you're getting paid $2.35 or whatever it is, that was kind of the taxes were being
Right.
paid by that limited money. Now I know that a lot of places have increased by mandate the amount that is paid as a paycheck to wait staff and others getting tips, but um, and that certainly can, I think, inflate the overall pay for some people. But I did want to talk to you. Mostly we talk about public policy here, but tipping culture seems
Oh
to, in
yeah.
many ways, have grown out of control in this country, and there's kind of a backlash to that. Just talk about tipping culture and obviously how it impacts restaurants if it does. But I really, I'm sitting in front of a laptop, the flipping of the iPad or whatever,
Yeah.
and you're standing there at the register, and it's like, why am I supposed to tip you? So talk a little bit about that.
Well, I will say the economic pressures on restaurants have been really, extreme. And so I get why they're flipping that around and taking the tips and maybe paying folks with that. But I will say also that to me, tipping is for service. And so when somebody comes to your table, takes your order, goes back, gets the food, brings it to your table, gets your check in time, it's it's kind of the last meritocracy that we have. And in that, I think, you start with a 15% tip. And then if the service is great, you go up to 20%. But I don't know that you go beyond that because really, then that makes a restaurant meal so much more expensive. And as far as, the counter service restaurants that are flipping the screen, um, I don't agree with it. We don't have an official statement from the New Mexico Restaurant Association, but I would say keep in mind that the pressures on those restaurants financially and economically are so high right now. Our food cost has gone. We're at 25% increase
Increase.
since the pandemic,
Hmm.
right? Since 2020, we're at 25% increase. So that's a quarter of our, money going into food and that's one of our biggest costs also. And then of course, labor's gone up. So, I get it why restaurants are doing this, but I also think that we've got to figure out how not to have these incredible add-ons. The other thing I'll remind you of is that credit card fees. So if you tip on a credit card, then um, the owner manager has to pay the credit card fees on that tip, and we pay credit card fees on the taxes.
Mm.
One of the things that we're looking at doing in New Mexico through the legislature in the next couple of sessions is running a bill that would take the credit card fees off of the gross receipts tax, which would save, I think it's like $34 million
So
for retail.
repeat that,
Yeah.
please, because I'm a little. So you have credit card fees, which everybody should know that when you pay for something with a credit card, the merchant is paying some fees there,
The
and
merchant is paying for your mileage,
right, yeah,
your
those
points and your mileage.
right,
That's the merchant pays for that,
those plane flights don't come for free.
for your
Right,
privilege to do that.
right.
Yeah.
And so, what is the policy idea that you're talking about in the legislature?
There's a couple of states that have done this already, and that is that the legislature would say that you banks cannot charge for the tax, credit card fees on the tax.
Okay.
So we're looking at that because it would save our members and retail folks a lot of
Man, the
money.
gross receipts tax just gets worse and worse every time you think about it. Boy,
But that would it wouldn't cost the state anything, right? It would only cost the credit card companies, the banks, and their big corporate banks that are making money on these things.
sure. And that's a very important. Let me throw something at you. We haven't talked about this, but there have been a few states that have done this, and I can see both sides from the restaurant perspective. And we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on right now, or soon to go on in Santa Fe, relating to crime in a second. But there's a lot of concern among financial privacy folks over the essentially forced push to credit cards or digital payment systems, which by and large is credit cards. So there are some places, and there is a nationwide effort to require that businesses take cash as a form of payment. I mean, it does say legal tender right there on the dollar bill, and that theoretically is meant to say, you can't, have to take that as payment. But some businesses, I mean, I can think of the isotopes, others are going digital only. Uh, what would be any thoughts on that kind of idea? And I realize I'm throwing this as a little bit of a curveball at you, but on one hand, so here's my analysis: is you have restaurants in high crime areas
Yeah.
that don't want to have cash on hand because they get robbed a lot, and
And
they
you expose your employees
exactly
to things, to crime that you don't want to expose them to. So I totally understand what their thought process is on this, but I do think the unbanked then can't use your services.
right. And so you are foregoing, if you do not take cash, some amount of business, and you're obviously kind of not just encouraging, but you're forcing that payment structure with all the fees to be used in your business. Because restaurants, I think cash has fallen out of favor with a lot of people, but I do use cash at a lot of restaurants, often more fast food type places. Once you get the
You can afford it.
wife and three kids out to dinner, I don't have too many $100 bills laying around in my pocket for the theft issue as well, or just the misplacement, losing the money. Anyway, I just thought I would throw that one at you in terms of cash versus credit, and I think this is fascinating stuff because both sides have some good arguments behind them. But I look forward to seeing a proposal from the restaurant association or whatever legislators during the next session. The easiest thing, I'm sure you would agree, would be to eliminate the gross receipts tax on restaurants. And
Well, the gross receipts tax was eliminated on food in grocery
groceries,
stores,
yeah,
and which put the pressure on restaurants. Now we're the only, I think at that time most of the gross receipts was around 6 to 7%, right? And then they took it off of groceries, and all of a sudden we're at 7 to 8% in gross receipts tax, and so the pressure's on in restaurants. So it would be a big boon to retailers in all over the state if we could do that. And we're going to get pushback from the bankers, but I'm kind of hoping, since we're the ones that are keeping them in business, it would be really nice if they would support us in this.
Sure. And real quickly, you may be aware that the city of Las Cruces will have a ballot measure with a potential very significant increase in the gross receipts tax rate. And I know that's where you originally got your start, right? In the Las Cruces area.
I had
in
3 restaurants in Las Cruces. So, I mean, that's a big deal. the pressures on going out to eat are so heavy right now. People complain to me all the time about restaurants increasing their menu prices, and I've had legislators say, you've got to tell your restaurants not to increase their menus. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but do you not see what's happening? Are you not having to spend more on groceries yourself? Because restaurants have that same pressure. We don't get, everybody thinks we get, discounted prices for groceries. And for the most part, restaurants do not, because we have the groceries delivered. It costs to have that delivery. And therefore, groceries aren't any less expensive in restaurants than they are in the grocery store.
Interesting.
So we start
Okay.
with the same price. Now, if you have a chain restaurants have the ability to negotiate those big contracts down, but the independent restaurants don't.
And I realize that most of your businesses are more of the independent sort here in New Mexico, but there was a fair amount of controversy. It does seem like a lot of the big, the McDonald's of the world felt some pressure, and there were charts I saw on the internet about how much they'd increased their prices in recent years,
Yeah.
and they've started trying to embrace that value customer. I think the days of eating lunch for $5 are behind us, but keeping that fast food costs to maybe $10 is where they're trying to keep prices low, and I'm sure that that puts pressure, as everything else does, on the independents. So,
Yeah.
any thoughts on that? But I did want to talk about, broadly speaking, the industry and its pressures, and there's been some conversation about different, mostly chains that have closed locations, Red Lobster, some of the other chains. And, if you'd be so kind as to kind of share just a little bit of who your members are, because people often think, oh, well, they're a chain. They don't engage in local politics or state politics, but they are often franchisees. They are often
Yes.
locally owned. So feel free to name drop chains that are or are not part of the Restaurant Association, but talk about some of the problems at some of these big entities. I mean, Cracker Barrel, Applebee's, TGI Fridays, Denny's, Boston Market. A lot of these places have had closures, and I'm sure related to the issues that you're talking about. But who engages with you and who doesn't, if you want to throw that out too.
Sure. Well, I will tell you that we take one and all. So any food service entity is welcome to join the New Mexico Restaurant Association, and that's from food trucks to chain restaurants. So
So you have food trucks.
we allow them to be members.
Okay.
There's not many that are.
Okay.
They just
But
don't.
that's interesting.
They're small.
Sure.
And
That's the point. Yeah.
that's the point. And our thing, basically is that someday maybe they will be a brick and mortar restaurant, and we want to serve them no matter where they're coming into the industry. So I will say that 70% of our members are independent restaurants.
Okay.
So that gives you an idea of who we have. And most of the chain restaurants here in McDonald's, they're all owned locally. They're all local franchises. I just got off the phone with Taco Cabana. And they're owned locally. A lot of the chain restaurants are owned locally. There's very few that are corporate owned.
Right.
And even then, when they're corporate owned, they keep their money in the state, in the city, by paying huge payrolls and
Sure.
buying groceries here, et cetera. Then as far as the problems in the industry, I do believe that a lot of it is challenges related to inflation. If you take Red Lobster, for example, I can't imagine being a seafood restaurant, as costly as seafood is. And then I heard, I'm not sure if this is, a major part of their problem, but they did, all you can eat shrimp. I think people ate them out of house and home, and
That's
they
what I
didn't,
heard as well.
right? So that was bad. Limited time offer, and it should have been more limited time than they made it.
Right.
So it's, seafood is very expensive. And for them to be a nationwide chain restaurant that offers seafood for reasonable prices. So many restaurants coming out of the pandemic, even though their prices had increased, they were so afraid of raising their prices, their menu prices. And I think that even happened to the chains. They were just very hesitant in raising their prices, knowing that they were going to lose customers by raising their prices, but knowing that their bottom line was going into the red so much that they had to do that. So I would,
And I think that's something that people don't understand. Average people who have never run a business don't understand that, when inflation goes up or the price of your business inputs go up, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to experience that immediately. They may be inclined to try to put, that into the bottom line and to hold off, but then things become untenable and they have to. And then maybe they have an opportunity down the road and they have to raise their prices or want to get back to where they were before. And so they raise their price again. So I guess what I'm getting at with that more or less question is inflation has finally slowed. Do you think that the restaurants are kind of back to where they were, or are they still kind of like the snake digesting the elephant or whatever is trying to be processed here?
I think they're getting back to maybe being comfortable with where they are in their pricing. And the problem is that we did lose a lot of customers when they increased their prices. So people, have to make choices, and if people would just think about it like their own home budgets, right? You get the pressure. Food going out is now very expensive. So now I have to make changes. Restaurants have had to make those changes. And, one reason we're so hesitant to raise our menu prices, number one, we're going to lose customers. That's proven fact. And number two, it's very expensive to print menus in most cases.
Right.
And so you don't want to take those increases until you absolutely have to, because it's going to cost you to print those menus too. And we're not like grocery stores. So, a price of a case of tomatoes goes up. Grocery stores, and you've seen Walmart is going to go to digital, so they can change it the minute
Sure.
that comes in the back door. They can change their price. Restaurants can't, and so avocados, go sky high, and all of a sudden, we're selling guacamole for a price that we can't even buy it for. So, yeah, and I don't know if that illustrates it well,
Sure.
but
Price stickiness is a real thing. Economists say, that it doesn't smoothly go up; it goes up kind of in a stair-step approach.
yeah, and we do that. I always tell my members, it's like nickel and dime them to death, right? Don't take one menu item and go up $5.
Right.
Take all your menu items and go up,
Yeah,
10
sense.
cents,
Yeah.
15 cents. And I do want to talk about, one of the restaurants that really had problems this year was Rubio's Grill, and they're not here in New Mexico, but I want to make a point. They
Okay.
lost 48 members, locations, yeah,
Okay.
in California because of California's regulations. And that has to do with the increased minimum wage and everything else. They just said, you know what? We don't need to do business here. It's too hard. And a lot of these chain restaurants are deciding on which restaurants make them money. We'll keep those open. The restaurants that don't make us money, we've got to cut our losses at some point.
And we can touch on California in a second, but I did want to ask you, obviously we went through the pandemic and then, and that was a huge shock to the system for restaurants and very difficult. We have past episodes talking about that, but it kind of dovetailed, if you will, unfortunately, into the inflation conversation that we've just been having. But you were on local radio talking recently about some job training programs and attracting workers to the restaurant industry, and kind of how has that recovered, or has it recovered? And anything you want to throw in there more about California and what they did. It's fairly well publicized that Gavin Newsom and the legislature out in California embraced what, a $16 minimum wage or $20?
$20
$20.
for fast food restaurants
Okay.
only.
So are you able to find, or most restaurants able to find workers these days? Just talk about that.
Yeah, the whole labor pool has changed.
Hmm.
And so what restaurants are telling me is they get people in, they keep them for a little, they may not keep them at all. I mean, some of them and especially right in the beginning when people were coming out of unemployment, they were they were called ghosting
Hmm.
them. So they would come in, take the job, take the uniform, go home, and never show up for their first shift. So that's not happening quite as much, but still folks are having a hard time keeping folks because the minute they get a paycheck, the minute they get enough time in to take unemployment again, they're back on unemployment or they're, and the big problem right now is the sick leave. So every time folks get a couple of hours of sick leave built up in their thing, they call in sick. And the problem with that piece of legislation is they don't even have to call in prior to their shift. As long as they call in within 24 hours, they cannot be fired. And
This is New Mexico's state
New
law, and this
Mexico's
is not related directly to the paid family medical leave bill that was discussed and failed narrowly in the last session. This is something that passed a year or two ago.
This is something that passed in the middle of the pandemic. And was not a good bill. We told them it wasn't a good bill. The governor said, I understand, we're going to pass it, but we're going to give you time to get it changed. So the next legislative session was a 30-day session because it's all passed under the cover of the legislature that was not open to the public, right? It was during the pandemic. So and then that next year, she didn't put it on her call, so we didn't ever have a chance to change it and make it better. Not that this legislature would have allowed that anyway, but it's not a good bill. It's very anti-business. And my point about these California restaurants is you can get to the point, and I want to call it the tipping point.
Wow, thank you. I gave you $5 for that.
Well, and I've been meaning to talk to you about this. Like, what is the tipping point for New Mexico and regulations? When do people, just stop opening restaurants or businesses? Or, I mean, we've kind of come to that point. We're not a heavy economic engine here in New Mexico. People do balk at the regulatory environment, but there has to be a tipping point here. We have to tip back to supporting these small businesses and allowing them to thrive in ways that they aren't overburdened with these regulations.
Well, thank you for the plug, but we'll move on to another issue that I think is worth discussing, and we have a special session right now. It's related to crime, and I think any business is impacted by crime. Are you engaged in any way, shape, or form in the crime conversation as it's happening right now in Santa Fe? It's okay to say no.
Yeah, we're not. We have tried to engage in that in years past with kind of no ability to really move the needle. And with the legislature the way it is now, I don't think anything's going to go through in this legislative session, which I hope the public will keep these legislators honest and say, you know what, you weren't willing to do anything. Now, all of the legislators are saying that we can't pass this bill, very large bill, in 3 days at a special session. Well, you'll remember that the governor called this session, I don't know, was it 3 months ago?
Yep.
So they've had all that time to work on these bills, and they have not. They have chosen not to work on these bills, and we are going to get out of the legislature exactly what we got in the 30-day session and the 60-day session before that. And, shame on everybody for not doing something, because restaurants, somebody told me the other day, oh, it was a little Dairy Queen gal. She's a franchisee here in Albuquerque. And she said, yeah, I don't have broken windows anymore. I put in 3-inch plexiglass.
Mm-hmm.
So now I don't have broken windows. She said, do you know how much that cost me? And I didn't. And it was in the tens of thousands of dollars.
Wow.
To put in this plexiglass that now she doesn't have broken windows, but the cost is so much. And I had a city councilor tell me that retailers and restaurants put in amounts of money for this crime, and it's just something that they put in as a cost of doing business. And I said, in fact, they don't. And she said, well, insurance pays for most of it. And I said, in fact, they don't.
Right.
Because insurance may pay for, one of those plexiglass windows. But
This
then,
was a city councilor.
City councilor, yes. Tammy Feeblecorn.
Okay.
Yeah.
I knew it was a Democrat from the moment you said that, because that is one of the dumbest arguments out there, that insurance is just this benevolent Santa Claus figure that hands out checks like nobody's business. And I have a lot of friends in the insurance industry, and of course, we've seen just insurance in general across the spectrum, not specifically relating to restaurants or crime, but cars and crashes and fires and floods and blah, 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 blah. All of that stuff has skyrocketed. It's one of the leading now. It's a lagging leader in the sense that
Right.
now the price is one of those things that's going up dramatically because a lot of reasons. Partially it's the technology in the automobiles and whatnot, but there's been a lot of things that have happened and caused insurance rates to go up. And they're not the first industry to increase their prices, but they will get their cut at the end.
And I have heard that because of some of the fires and floods and all of that, insurance companies for a couple of years were losing money, which
Yep.
they're not used to doing. They're used to making a lot of money.
They do not
and
like doing
they
that.
do not like to lose money. And that's what their actuaries are for, is to make sure
Right.
that they do not lose money.
Well, I agree with you on the special session. On one hand, I'm somewhat hopeful because it's the first time that the governor seems to have at least recognized, and what they say, the first step to solving a problem is knowing you have one. Amazingly, it's taken 6 years. There have been solutions out there from the Republicans in 6 legislative sessions now, plus give or take specials. But obviously, the governor and the legislature are not the only players when it comes to crime. And I'm sure you could talk to your Albuquerque restaurants who I'm sure feel either that they're still under attack from crime or that they've embraced 3-inch thick plexiglass, which is a whole different equation there. But those people versus folks in Doña Ana County, in Rio Rancho, in Roswell, Hobbs, et cetera. It's a totally different perspective, and just whatever you want to share.
But I'm hearing more and more some of this crime is being pushed.
Okay.
So I just heard the other day that, crime and criminals in Albuquerque who are getting pushed back with this the retail crime
Right.
stuff are now moving to Santa Fe. Not that that's good, but at least the people of Santa Fe will understand what's happening, and so maybe push their legislators to do the right thing. And and we've heard this for years, well, we don't have a crime problem in Las Cruces, so why are we going to try to solve your crime problem in Albuquerque? And it's all of our crime problem. I think it's based on kind of our image as that Breaking Bad place to be. And
Right.
it should be a crime for people to do fentanyl, right? It is a crime to do those drugs, but they're not being held responsible for that. And therefore they come into our restaurants. I had one of my board members, she said, Carol, I just got a call from my restaurant. They set a fire on my patio. Luckily, it did not catch the restaurant on fire, but you saw High Noon.
Hmm.
Their restaurant did catch on fire from a homeless person, and we're not doing anything about this. They're smoking fentanyl, they're smoking crack on their premise, and they won't move them.
Right. And that, just to put a fine point on it, this is primarily an issue of local governance, especially here in
Yeah.
Albuquerque. We'll just point the finger right at Mayor Tim Keller. So buckle up, Buttercup. It's going to be a fun election next year, too, once this whole presidential thing and legislative thing works its way out, because the mayoral issue in crime, I think, is it's probably at least 50%. There's some judges. We need to have accountability for our judicial system. The legislature and the governor are players, but they're not the prime players here. So, speaking of that, you've been very active. Your association has been very active politically, and both in those local races as well as some legislative races during the primaries, uh, working with moderate Democrats. Things, obviously, as we sit here right now in mid-July, seem to be moving in a very good direction nationwide, which should affect things in New Mexico. What are you guys doing to actually make that happen? Broadly speaking, you don't have to get into too many details, but what's your take on the politics of where things are heading?
What's the Lou Wallace curse?
Uh, Things that have been tried elsewhere fail upon the rocks of reality in New Mexico. I believe it's something along those lines.
Something along those lines. So, what makes you think that anything going on nationally is going to come back down to New Mexico? I mean, we are a nonpartisan group. We support lots of folks.
Well, the primary, you were very involved with moderate Democrats.
We were, because they helped us during the paid family medical leave vote. I mean, 11 of them crossed the line and voted with us on that bill. And it's a horribly bad bill. It's a bill that will go bankrupt. It's a state fund that's bigger than the unemployment fund, $275 million in this fund that's being funded by employees and employers.
This is the paid family leave bill, which failed by essentially 2 votes. You could say 1 vote, but and that was there were about 10 moderate Democrats who voted against it.
11 that crossed.
11,
yeah.
Okay, and then the progressives attacked them, including the governor, and defeated. They defeated a couple of them. What were
they
the numbers?
They defeated 3 of them.
3 of them.
And in the primary. So the fact is that only 5 of them had primaries. So we kept 2, and that was folks who had been there a long time, and then they got 3 out with their primaries, and one of those has a general election.
Right.
So we'll see how that goes, but
it's got to be frustrating, though, to see the Democratic Party, which has controlled New Mexico for nearly 100 years, and for much of its history, it's never been economically conservative, but culturally, they've been pro-gun and kind of, in many ways, common sense on a lot of non-economic issues. And crime, I would say, is one of those things. It's got to be frustrating to see relatively common sense voices booted out of the Democratic Party for whatever reason.
Well, I think it's kind of funny because it's, here's the governor trying to get these progressives to see her agenda for this special session.
Right.
And they're the ones that are going against her. She just got them, she got most of them elected.
Right.
And now they're going against her on crime. And I don't know what she expected, but you get what you get.
Right.
And that's what we've gotten in New Mexico. You're right. There have been those moderate voices, but fewer and fewer, and they're all being targeted by this Emerge group, which is these women, and they're very good at elections. They are so good at elections, and we
Great
have
at elections, terrible at governing.
right, just awful at governing.
Yeah.
Like they're people with absolutely no real life experience,
Yeah.
and so it's quite scary for
So
New Mexico.
the upshot is here that based on what happened in June, paid family leave would pass the new legislature based on those House outcomes. And it will happen unless some 2, 3 votes change, some Republican pickups happen in some of these House races for sure. Now, that's kind of got to be considered the absolute baseline for Republicans at this point, based on, I get the Lew Wallace quote, but there have been, we're not, you and I are old enough to remember 2015 and 2016 when the House of Representatives went Republican with the Republican governor here in New Mexico. I believe that the demographics have changed, but they haven't changed so dramatically that you can't make serious inroads in some of these legislative races. So I know you don't want to talk about specific races and individuals, but I know you will be working on those kinds of issues as November approaches, and we'll all be watching it very, very carefully. But you're also with the HELP coalition, the Healthy Economies Lead to Progress, and that's been very successful with addressing city council here in Albuquerque specifically. That's an Albuquerque exclusive thing. How do you think things are going? I mean, the challenge is that Keller remains the mayor and he remains horrible at his job, certainly vis-a-vis crime. The mayor will be up. He's running again. No 2-term limit for him. So how are efforts to recruit candidates for mayor and other important races at city council, how are things shaping up for next November?
Yeah, I don't think too many people are thinking about it right now. I think we're at a point where we have a couple of mayoral candidates that we've heard about. Nobody that I can talk about,
Sure.
but I'm hopeful that we have some folks that may be able to beat this mayor. I want to be nice to him, but it's just when you get somebody that their whole life has been spent as a legislator, honestly, they don't have any idea about how to run an administration.
Yeah.
And we've got the same thing in Michelle Lujan Gresham. They don't know how to run an administration. And so we're like, all of our outcomes are just horrible.
Yeah.
Nobody's being held accountable. And that's because you've been in charge of yourself for your whole life. You've never been in charge of anybody else.
Yeah. Well, Mayor Keller, I've interacted with him. He's a decent enough person to have a conversation with, but the city of Albuquerque will be further hindered in its progress forward by the reelection of Mayor Keller. There's no question about that. Briefly, I want to give you a chance to talk about your industry's efforts to help victims down in Ruidoso, victims of the fires. If you could take just a minute to talk about what you've done down there.
Yeah, so we started a program called the Serving New Mexico Fund, which helps employees in the industry that are going through hardships. And of course, we gave out like $200,000 during the pandemic to these very employees. And then when the fires came up, we have some money in that fund. We have since given $123,000 to folks going through hardship in both Ruidoso and then in Las Vegas with the floods. When restaurants have to close down, they don't have income anymore, and so our fund gives grants to them. Kind of no questions. Basically, our only question is we call the general manager and we say, "Is this person on your payroll?" If they are, then we will give them money. And so, gosh, I think, I was supposed to know this. I think we've given over 600 grants totaling $123,000. So if anybody cares to help us out with that fund, it's, as far as I know, it's the only fund that was there for relief immediately. Everything else, there's a disaster unemployment fund. People have to apply for unemployment and be turned down from unemployment
Oh,
before they can apply for this
how do
disaster
people get
unemployment.
find out more about that?
So about the disaster
Yeah,
unemployment, that's on the Workforce Solutions
but the one
website.
you guys are
Oh,
involved with.
ours is on the New Mexico nmrestaurants.org, and it's /serving-nm-fund. And you can either give to the fund or you can apply for grants. Although we have reached our limit on this particular grant fund, and so we're unless we get more money, we're not going to be able to give you any more grants. Which people are back to work a little bit, depending on the restaurant
Yeah,
that they were working at. So we feel a little bit of relief. Thank you, God, for the rain. Right?
absolutely. All right. Well, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you, Carol. And nmrestaurants.org is your website, right? So folks want to find out more, they can do that there. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.